All right. Next topic we wanted to discuss. This one is going to be more political than usual, more purely political at least. I had a couple of scenarios I wanted to play out for you guys, and I wanted to see what you thought. I've done this a couple of times now, so we'll see how this one goes. It's actually less political, I think, and more about democracy.
That sounds political.
Well, I mean, there's politics over the top of democracy, and then there's kind of the democratic institutions and the society in which we live, right? And so I'm really talking about governance, and I'm talking about democracy and how current politics may affect those. And so obviously the stability of the US government is super important to startups everywhere, to human beings everywhere. You know, it's District 1. We all need a good, happy, healthy US governance model and government. People on that front are mostly focused right now, I think, on the US election. You know, will Biden win? Will Trump win? And I don't see a lot of people talking about what happens post-election. And I think irrespective of who wins, I think there's a meaningful chance, actually, of significant instability and even violence, irrespective of who wins. And I wanted to kind of talk you guys through that and explain my reasoning and then see what you think. Let's talk about the first, more obvious case first. So if Biden wins, you can see it playing out like last time, where Trump refuses to concede, continues to perpetuate a lie that the election was rigged. Things may come to a head again around, let's say, a January 6th style event, maybe bigger, since maybe January 6th was, let's say, a dress rehearsal, and it could trigger a larger set of political unrest or political violence. Maybe. I think there's a meaningful chance something like a January 6th happens again, and, you know, might that trigger some more back and forth. But I think the more subtle case is if Trump wins, he continues dismantling democratic institutions and norms, right? This is not a theory. He's been doing that all along. Media is the enemy of the people. The courts have been stacked with Trump supporters. Once independent departments have attempted to be weaponized against people, and I think that'll only happen more. And then the question becomes, is there another election? Is there another free and fair election? Is there another uncontested election? I don't know, but somewhere along that timeline, it'll feel like chaos and everyone's upset and protests and whatever, and it'll be like a frog in boiling water. What is going on? We don't know. But at some point, when does that become violent? Because again, he crosses some line for someone somewhere, and things are not going the way the majority of the country wants. And so in both cases, I'm seeing like a really meaningful chance that there is a delayed violent reaction after the election, and that it has some degree of chance to cascade. Maybe zero chance, maybe some chance, or more.
I want to hear Emil.
I actually think the bigger risk is if Trump gets elected. I don't know if you remember, after he got elected in 2016, 2 million women took to the streets with these hats, and yeah, there was a lot more. It wasn't violence, but it was the people were angry about the result. And I think they'll be even angrier this time. I kind of disagree almost completely that there's some destruction of democratic norms if he wins legit like he did in 2016, and there's no dispute about it. People will be angry. But like, he could say what he wants about the press. For hundreds of years, the presidents have hated the press. And so he calls them a nastier name than others. I don't think that's a destruction of the press. And by the way, the American people have totally lost trust in the press before Trump. They totally said that institution has destroyed itself. He's appointed people to the court. Biden's appointed more people to the federal courts, not the Supreme Court, than Trump has. Biden has forgiven nearly $1 trillion in student loans after the Supreme Court told him he shouldn't be doing it. So he found another way to do it. So I just don't buy it's democracy versus autocracy. That's just not a thing. I think it's just people are going to be angry no matter what. On January 6th, had there been 300 police officers there at the Capitol, it just wouldn't have happened. So like, I'm pretty sure that to the extent Biden wins, like, they'll just be more prepared. There might be a fissure where people are just angry, but I don't think this turns into like a violent conflict in either scenario.
To your point, Chris, you were saying this is not about politics, this is about democracy, but it would appear to me very much that an individual's political leanings pretty much define the extent to which they're worried about whether this is a threat to democracy. And so it's nearly like people can't agree on a basic set of facts or a basic neutral interpretation of those facts. And it's very hard to divorce all of this from Donald Trump, because the way that people interpret him seems wildly different, right? Is he a threat to democracy, or is he someone that just says it like it is and maybe uses, what did you say, Emil, nastier language to say the same things that politicians and presidents have
More provocative
always
language. He's more provocative, which is part of why people like listening to him. But again, like you could argue, like there's so many arguments, counter arguments. Hillary said when she lost in 2016 that Trump only won because of the Russians. Stacey Abrams, when she lost governor, she still hasn't conceded the governor's race in Georgia. Hakeem Jeffries didn't vote for Trump's electors. Like, this just feels like...
Yeah, but this is all a recent phenomenon, right? There has never been a candidate, as far as I understand it, in modern political history in the US, who failed to concede the election, congratulate the winner, and wish for his success or her success, close the campaign and move on. I am not aware of that ever happening in modern...
That has not been the norm, correct.
Right. And I've been writing, you have to believe me, Emil, for years, decades, about the loss of faith in the media and their own self-inflicted wounds there. But I don't think there has been such a loss of faith in democratic institutions and norms as there has been under Trump, encouraged by and heightened by Trump. One of the most interesting things I've ever heard someone say about Trump is that liberals seem to take him literally but not seriously, and conservatives seem to take him seriously but not literally.
Peter Thiel said that, apparently.
I think in some cases, you need to take him literally, and in all cases, you need to take him seriously. I'm always confused by people's diminishing of his power to break important mental models and consensus that the US has about its own civilization, its own country. And these are things that are already hanging on by a thread.
Hold on, man. Look, the CDC and the COVID and the inability for those institutions to go back and say we were wrong about this or wrong about that was ridiculous. And that wasn't Trump. That was
But that was Trump.
No. It was after Trump left in 21 when they wouldn't send kids back to school until that fall. They told Facebook, you can't publish this, or we don't prefer you don't publish that. That all information suppression. And therefore the loss in the medical establishment. And even with the trans issues, the sort of lack of confidence, those things happened not because of Biden, but during Biden.
Yeah, so let's not debate kind of the right or wrong of what was said and when it was said. But what I am trying to point out is that without Trump being a very vocal proponent that these things that were being said are wrong and are therefore malicious and are therefore dangerous and therefore anti-democratic and therefore you must believe in and vote for Trump, there was no person who would take a pandemic and point at the pandemic response, which was likely to be as well-meaning as possible and as well-intentioned as possible, however bumbled or fumbled, and say, this is the government trying to take your freedom and you need to rise up, basically. You're turning it into a political opportunity and a loss of faith in government and governance to a degree that leads to a January 6th. There's a difference between, hey, they fumbled the ball on COVID. Maybe. We can argue who did that, why they did that, when that happened, why. But the intensity of the response and backlash to the fumbling of the ball, let's assume that's what happened, was supercharged by Trump and Trumpism.
But here's where I'll disagree with you on the thing, because I think you're getting your timelines messed up. When he called it the China virus, it was racist, that didn't come from the lab, and all of a sudden turns out it likely came from a Chinese lab. And
yeah, but I'm not really talking about that stuff, Emil. That stuff is mostly benign.
Okay, hold on. So then when the vaccine came out in January of 21, when Biden was inaugurated, the teachers union stopped kids from going back to school in many states. And the governors who rejected that ended up being right. And a loss of a school year of school was very damaging to these, especially poor kids.
Let's say I agree with you. Let's say for the sake of argument, I agree with you. More damaging is, well, you can't trust the courts, you can't trust the CDC, you can't trust the media, you can't trust what the CIA is telling you, you can't trust anyone or anything except me. Again, let's assume for the sake of argument that the media fumbled the ball or political correctness fumbled the ball on China and where the virus came from. Let's say they fumbled the ball on how to deal with the virus. Let's say they fumbled the ball on kids out of school for a year. The problem is not the fumbling of the ball. The problem is those guys are malicious, incompetent, and dangerous, those institutions that you believe in, people, and I'm the only one who can give you the truth, and creating a cult of personality around an individual instead of around institutions. I would rather the CDC fumble a year of school for kids than for the American people to lose faith in the CDC. You know what I'm saying? Or rather lose faith in the CIA, because this is the fundamental organs of the government and of the country.
I understand. And again, I do believe this is generally colored by people's opinions on the candidates, me included. But I will say this, like, this is not that relevant for startup founders, but the moment Trump was inaugurated in the office, they started a multi-year investigation on the Russia papers, the dossier where he was in a Russian hotel, which was totally false. And it was spent years with the justice system that was going after him for that. So you could imagine the grievance that he would have, where your first act as president, the romance of the first 100 days, you don't have it because you're doing that. So of course he's going to say the system's corrupt. There's like 5 or 6 court cases now. Most of these are garbage.
Let's assume I take your premise wholesale, which I don't, but let's, for the sake of argument's sake, I take your premise on all of the court cases. All the court cases are frivolous. The courts themselves are not. And I think part of his defense is, you don't get to prosecute a president. You don't get to prosecute me. The courts are illegitimate. And because this judge was elected by or placed by a Biden or by an Obama, that makes them illegitimate. And so any defense that involves an erosion of trust, public trust in the system of justice is, I would say, dangerous and divisive and damaging to the highest degree and is unbefitting a president. But I'm not actually arguing whether Trump is a good person or a bad person. I'm a bit surprised that you don't think of him as dangerous, actually. I think he's been dangerous, and I think that's been, like, provably true. But that's actually not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, for whatever confluence of reasons, irrespective of who wins, we are where we are, and I'm seeing a meaningful pathway to civil unrest, irrespective of who wins, and a delayed effect. So I'll tell you why I say delayed, why I emphasize delayed. I was really thinking about moving back to the US. And I was thinking, well, maybe I don't want to be there under Trump. Let's see who wins the election, and then I'll decide. And then I was talking to my friend, and I was like, hang on a second. If Trump wins, I believe he will continue to dismantle faith and efficacy of the institutions of democracy. And if Biden wins, I think Trump won't concede. This plays out towards a non-zero chance of violence and a real threat to American democracy long term. And I just feel like I have not heard anybody else talk about it in those terms. They're kind of fixated on who's going to win the election. And I think we need to be looking past the election.
If these college protests are a harbinger of things to come, it's the Trump election that will drive occupations of buildings and all this crazy stuff in another version, not against the Israeli-Gaza war, but against Trump. And I actually think there's much more risk of civil unrest.
I agree with you. That is a pathway to the unrest that I'm speaking of. And I think, like the Gaza protests, they may start off peaceful, and then the Trump-backed police action against them, or the MAGA reaction against them, will make them violent. And so it will become, from a peaceful protest, or let's say angry protest, maybe even violent protest from the left, I'll even give you that, will turn into increasing, escalating violence because of police action. He wanted to shoot the people that were getting in his way because he wanted to walk across the yard. And he was asking, can't we just shoot them in the legs? I mean, like, he wanted to nuke a storm. Like, he's willing to use violence against, like, the population. And I'm saying, once he's in his last term in office, and there are fewer reasonable people around him, yeah, I agree with you. The protests from the left can turn into violence from the left and right. And I'm worried about the response from there. That's just one of many pathways I see to civil unrest post-election.
You guys are living in a bubble. Look at 2016 and 20. Was there a dictatorship in this country when Trump was elected? No,
yeah,
of course
if
not.
you believe, yes.
No,
hang
he
on.
lost
if
both
you believe
houses of Congress.
If you believe Trump's argument in court that the president should have full immunity, he believed himself to be in a dictatorship.
No, that's just not true. So
and he tried to overturn the election so he could maintain his dictatorship.
No. Any lawyer in America who studies the Supreme Court will know that, like, they take polarized arguments. So the argument on one side was that he has no immunity, which is also absurd. Meaning some random, like, state U.S. attorney in Mississippi could go, Joe Biden, I'm going to fucking indict you for taking bribes from the Ukraine. Like, that's not okay. No. So you can't, there has to be some presidential immunity where they're not dragged into court in any biased prosecution sense. And on the other hand, of course, there's no full immunity. You can't just, like, murder people, political rivals. So the intellectual argument was made, and the Supreme Court is probably going to send it back and said, you have to define some principles about when the president's immune or not, because it's definitely not zero, and it's definitely not all. But that was just a way to make the argument in front of the Supreme Court. I just think, again, the media is making too much of that argument.
Yeah, I continue to believe the problem is one of conflation. And in the latest example here is the conflation between Trump's policies and Trump the man. Like, again, I could, once again, for the second or third time in this episode, I could give you the entire argument that every one of Trump's policies are better than the Democratic ones, just for the sake of argument. I'll give you that. I think the border does need to be more controlled, not in the way he describes it, but it needs to be more controlled. I think China does run roughshod over the US in some ways, but maybe the way he responded, the way he talked is ineloquent and belligerent. On and on and on. I actually think, we've had an Israel debate, Palestine debate on this show. I actually think the Abraham Accords were helpful to Palestine because it makes the situation clear and codifies the reality on the ground. And so stop wishing for things that are never going to happen. I'll give you all of that. But he is not just an imperfect person to espouse and execute those ideas, he is a dangerous person to espouse and execute those ideas. And you get the baby and the bathwater. Nobody votes in a dictator. They vote in the good parts, and they get the bad parts as well. And you're not taking him literally or seriously in the ways that I am, Emil. And it's clear 30-40% of the country is not in the US. And I think they do that at extreme peril. And I don't know why they're even flirting with the peril versus finding one of his other lackeys to vote.
But there you go. You're like, these people must not be taking him seriously. Therefore, they're not smart enough to understand the consequences.
I don't think they're taking him. I think they have too much faith in the American system and don't understand how fragile it's become. I think part of them are happy for a dictatorship along the lines in which they believe. And I've seen them, especially the crazy right-wing extremists, Christians especially. They are happy for the truth-loving, Bible-thumping America to be controlled by... They believe Trump was provided to them by Jesus. Okay, and that the Constitution was divinely inspired.
Yes, but then the extreme left wants to defund the police.
Because the extreme left are, in many cases, in many ways, fucking morons as well, and choose very poor slogans, but the extreme left are not at risk of electing a wannabe strongman, so they don't matter, right? Anyway, I didn't want this to turn into a debate about Trump, although it is fun. I love having this, and Emil, I want to have more of these debates with you, my friend. Actually, I love it. I loved it.
I'm calling this. I'm calling this.
Yeah, let's go.
This is too much. This is too much in the weeds.
Let's wrap it up. But I do think, I haven't heard any of us say a kind of contradictory theory here. I do think, is it fair to say, to summarize, all of us believe there is a non-zero, even a non-minor chance that there will be meaningful political violence in the US post-election. And that creates a destabilizing force for the startup ecosystem, for the business ecosystem, and the global political system in general. Is it fair to say we all agree on that?
I would say I feel there's a higher probability of it than there has ever been in my lifetime in US elections, presidential elections, yes.
I agree with that. I don't think it's probable. It's more possible than it's been before.
Well, There you have it, guys. You heard it here first. Prepare for the improbable or ignore this entirely.